Mr. Saktiandi Supaat.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, according to Statista's research department, an estimated 5.2 million Singaporean residents access the internet in 2021. If you take into account users who access online social media platforms using their mobile devices, the internet penetration rate goes up higher from 89.5% to around 90%. The age of such users is also getting younger and younger. When speaking to children and their parents at community events, I found out that it is no longer surprising for primary school children to have their own accounts on at least one or two social media platforms. This bill, therefore, is timely in putting in some minimum protections from the increasingly widespread use of online platforms. I have some clarifications to seek on the bill, as well as several comments on how we can make online aspect of our society a safe and secure place for Singaporeans and Singapore residents. First, the principal amendment of the bill is the addition of a new part in Broadcasting Act that will allow the Infocomm's Media Development Authority, or MDA, to issue directions to providers of online communication services to disable or block access to egregious content. Egregious content is then defined in the new Section 45D to include content that advocates or instructs on suicide, self-harm, child nudity, and terrorism. In connection with Limb B, I have two questions. First, does, open brackets, content that advocates or instructs on violence or cruelty to, physical abuse of, or acts of torture, or other infliction of serious physical harm on human beings, close bracket, catch videos that encourage Singaporeans to participate in foreign armed conflict? I recall that when Ukraine conflict broke out in February this year, there were people ringing up the Ukrainian embassy in Singapore wanting to join the fight in Ukraine. MHA even had to put out a statement to warn that it would be an offense to join a foreign war. Second, why do we stop at violence or cruelty, abuse, or torture on human beings? Are videos of animal cruelty or abuse not equally offensive? Perhaps this can be prescribed as egregious content too, under other Part 10A regulations. I would also like to seek clarifications on whether there are any other categories of egregious content that the Ministry or MDA is intending to prescribe under regulations. Will we also look to censor content which explicitly promotes lifestyles which are not in line with what is presently accepted as norms, or the commercialization of obscene and nude photos and videos? Should we also designate obvious scam advertisements as egregious content? I will look forward to Minister's response on this. The amendments in this bill will allow for more effective enforcement against egregious content by placing the onus on the online platform providers to disable or block access. On social media platforms with millions, if not billions, of users, it is more efficient to regulate the platform rather than individual uploaders. The bill provides that an electronic service provider is covered so long as it allows content to be accessed in Singapore, unless it is an excluded electronic service. This would extend to a service that is provided from outside Singapore. For such foreign service providers who do not have a place of business in Singapore or its HQ, how does the Ministry intend to effectively enforce the regulations which are premised on giving a direction to the service provider and making non-compliance with such directions a criminal offence? What will stop these foreign service providers from keeping their operations strictly outside Singapore while flagrantly delivering egregious content into Singapore? It appears from new Section 45R(3) that there will be individuals tasked to monitor and flag egregious content for the purpose of enforcing these new laws. Would a new department be set up under IMDA or the Singapore Police Force to do this? What would be the size of this enforcement department? This is relevant because the effectiveness of protection will depend on the speed which we are able to block and take down offensive content. For example, back in March 2019, I believe this example has been shared by many speeches before me. The far-right extremist live streamed himself on Facebook Live, shooting and killing 50 people in New Zealand, at the New Zealand mosque. Facebook did not block the live stream. Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter had to fight to take down 1 million copies of the video circulating online within 24 hours. So the damage was already done. I'm sure most will agree that this is an obvious example of egregious content, but there may be also other types that are more debatable, especially where Singapore's tolerance level and definition of racially or religiously offensive content may differ from the rest of the world, or even from the perspective of the content provider or the service provider globally. How fast do we expect to act to issue disabling and blocking directions to electronic service providers? Can the government share some detail about the processes it intends to put in place to arrest any unforeseen scenarios promptly? Even after the electronic service providers are issued the disabling or blocking directions, how long will they be given to comply with the directions given? Will the time frame be stated on the direction? This is especially significant because the new Section 45G reverses the burden of proof onto the electronic service provider to show that it had done the best that was reasonably practicable to do when it is charged with an offence under Section 45E(1) or 45F(1). Perhaps we can consider enhancing a second prong of enforcement by relying on the user reporting avenues to flag objectionable content. This may result in faster detection because we effectively rely on a wider pool of eyes to identify and flag egregious content. From a regulatory standpoint, we could legislate higher frequency instead of an annual basis or more frequent audits on how quickly and effectively these electronic service providers act on the user reports that it receives and the systems and processes it has put in place. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I also note that the bill provides for the potential expansion of the regulatory scope through the issuance of subsidiary legislation, orders, or online codes of practice. While the bill, if passed, starts off by targeting social media services only, the Minister will be authorized to amend or add to this list of services in the 4th schedule by publishing an order in the Gazette. May I ask what other types of electronic services may be potentially brought within the scope of these new provisions? There are also going to be enhanced regulation of certain platforms that are designated a regulated online communication service, having regard to the range of services provided to Singapore end users and the extent and nature of the effect of such services in Singapore. Has the Ministry provisionally identified which platforms will be designated as a regulated online communication service, and whether the Ministry has already engaged with these platforms? I give one example. We had a hackathon in Toa Payoh ECC. I had chatted with some of the youths there. They did share with me a platform called Discord. I think some of the gamers in this house may know about that. It's a gaming platform where gamers can chat amongst others within the Discord servers. It's an online chat service. However, what's significant is that it has more than 140 million monthly active users now. And it's been used just beyond gaming. So it's one example of an online communication service that has evolved and new things that come up. So this regulated online communication service may be subjected to one or more online codes of practices to be issued by the MDA. And the new Section 45L states that the Minister will prescribe certain consultation processes to be followed before an online code of practice can be issued, amended, or revoked. Are these processes already ready to be presented to Parliament for consideration? If not, when can we expect these processes to be finalized and legislated? Besides a robust consultation process leading up to the issuance of an online code of practice, may I also suggest that the Ministry think about a periodic consultation process that can be put in place so that industry feedback can be canvassed on amendments that need to be made on an existing online code of practice. May I also suggest that we have a council or possibly an advisory panel set up to draw up and update the online code of practice from a diverse group of representatives. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like to conclude by sharing some thoughts that are beyond the scope of this bill, but which I believe we should consider in our safety review of our online landscape. First, I understand that this bill presently targets egregious content which should not be appropriate for consumption regardless of age or maturity. On behalf of concerned parents with young or teenage children like myself, I would like to ask if the Ministry foresees that some of the provisions here may be watered down in future to provide for age-specific classification of objectionable content. My worry there is that it is simply not as easy to verify one's age in the online world as checking one's EZ-Link card or NRIC at the cinema. Second, the algorithms on social media platforms that create echo chambers with like-minded individuals while shunning opposing views also have the risk of deepening divides in our society. While it is understandable for platforms to push products that are matched to user interests so as to maximize advertising revenues, there should be certain controls on pushing views that are consistent with an individual's echo chambers. The latter will only push people towards extremes and worsen the divisiveness of our society. Third, there is also an observation that society will become less and less informed as social media platforms deprioritize news and other serious content in favor of entertainment-related content. This is especially acute given the success of TikTok in recent years, where user clicks are driven more by less serious content and platforms are adapting their algorithms to stay commercially competitive. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, notwithstanding the clarification sought, I support the bill.